Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Repeat Ron, and today we're going to be doing another tier list for Killing Floor 2. This is going to be taking a look at all the demo weapons. I'm doing this because last time I did demo weapons, I did not include the Gravity Imploder because it just barely came out. I will be doing another list like this for Sharpshooter because that's also when the Beluga Beat came out, and I did not include it on that list. So let's begin with demos weapons, and we're going to be including all of them, including things like the pistol and the knife, and I'll be going over them briefly as to where I put them. So the grenade pistol is your starting weapon, and it is pretty strong. It's one of the strongest starting weapons. It actually, I think, is the strongest weapon when it's fully upgraded, and it scales really well. You do have limited ammunition with it, and early on it can be kind of a pain to use it effectively because you do kind of have to bash with it, but it can still rack up some good damage. It does well against crowds. It does well against most Zeds that aren't resistant towards explosives. You can have some early issues with rioters and with bloats, which are going to be two of the biggest threats early on, as well as if you're not running sonic rounds, then sirens can also be an issue. So if you haven't got up to level 15, or if you prefer the larger explosion radius, any of your weapons kind of suffer from that. Overall, the grenade pistol is pretty good. It's a weapon that I take every once in a while and hang on to. You can't hurt yourself with it, which is a really good thing for demo. It's very beginner friendly, and any beginners playing demo, I'd recommend to hang on to it for a while, get used to it, and then, maybe transition to another weapon later on. I would probably put the grenade pistol in B tier. The 9mm pistol is what you're going to use once you're out of bullets with your grenade pistol, or what you're going to use somewhat frequently with demo, actually, because you might not have weapons to be using at every range, and the 9mm gives you a decent weapon at every range, and you usually have ammo for it. Still, it's the 9mm, you don't get any bonuses for it, so I'm going to put this into D tier. The knife, you also get no bonuses with, and it's really bad to have to be knife fighting things as demo because you are kind of a squishy class, so knife also goes into D tier. The half stick of dynamite is a pretty good grenade to be throwing, as it does the most amount of damage, but it does have the longest fuse on it, so if you don't hit something directly, you do have to wait for that whole fuse time to tick down to blow up. I think I'd put this one into B tier because it still has high damage and it has a really high stun chance when you hit something with it. To the tier 2 weapons, we have two of these. We have C4 and we have the M79. Starting off with the C4. C4 does really high damage. You do get enough of it to be useful with demo because you get so many extra every couple levels, I believe. You can blow yourself up with this, which I've seen plenty of people do. It works really well against large enemies like Flesh Pounds, as well as towards the Patriarch. I don't use C4 a whole lot these days, but I still don't hate it. At least I don't use it a lot on demo. I actually use it a lot more on other classes like Commando or SWAT. Demo doesn't necessarily need it, but it is still a pretty decent weapon. I would put this into C tier. The M79 grenade launcher can also be pretty good given the circumstance. This has a large explosion radius, which means you can injure yourself very easily, and it's not uncommon to be taking chip damage when using this, especially if you're going with the larger explosion radius at level 15. The grenade launcher is really good against crowds, and it can do okay against most enemies. You don't really want to be using this at close range though, because it does have an arming time. The grenade has to travel a certain distance in order for it to be armed to then explode. This can be an issue in certain maps. It's not always the best option for all maps, especially tight enclosed maps or tight maps with a lot of corners. It can be kind of difficult to use then. In wide open maps, it's much better. And for that, it's a pretty solid weapon to be clearing up small Zeds with, and even clearing up medium Zeds. You can even fight Flesh Pounds and stuff with it, but it's not going to really help you against something like a Scrake. I would put this one also into C tier. Honestly, I don't know if it's really an upgrade to buy this over the grenade pistol. You can do more AoE damage, you can kill more things with a single shot from it, but the grenade pistol has the advantage of just not being able to injure yourself. Next we have the tier 3 weapons, and starting up we got the Kaboom Stick. This is pretty much like the most meta weapon on demo right now. You see this in pretty much every loadout for demo, and for a good reason. It has insanely high damage. Whether you're shooting it with 1 barrel or 2 barrels, it gives demo bonus mobility, which they do not have, so that's a big advantage. You can jump into the air and fire both barrels, and this will fling you backwards. That's what gives you the extra mobility, so you can actually outrun things like Scrakes and Flesh Pounds if they start coming after you. This thing completely destroys Flesh Pounds on any difficulty, and you don't need to throw upgrades into it. It also sits at a nice weight of 6, so you can take any other weapon you want with it. That's pretty much why it's the most meta weapon, and it's easily up into S tier. Next we have the M16, which is another pretty solid weapon overall for demo. I think it's a better weapon on Commando than it is on demo, but on demo it's still pretty decent. You get an assault rifle and a grenade launcher. The grenade launcher functions essentially the same as the M79, just with a smaller explosion radius, so it's a little bit easier to not blow yourself up with. And I don't really remember taking a whole lot of chip damage over time. The assault rifle part is really good. It's one of the best assault rifles in the game. It has very low recoil. It has very nice iron sights. a high rate of fire and decent enough damage to be picking off small and medium Zeds at really any range. It comes in at a very nice weight of 6. I'd probably put the M16 up into A tier for demo, maybe high B tier or low A tier. It's a pretty solid weapon all the way around. I don't really have any problems with it, and I take it somewhat often with demo, depending on if I want a certain loadout or something. Pulverizer next. Pulverizer is probably demo's weakest weapon at the moment, at least by itself. It does make for a decent secondary weapon, though, if you want a strictly defensive weapon. You can hit harder with the pulverizer on demo than you can on Berserker, because you have so much increased damage towards explosions. This can clear crowds up really easy. It works really well against things like Skrakes and Flesh Pounds, because you have a melee weapon, so you can block and parry with it, as well as high explosion damage and very high stumble/knockdown chance with it. If you're like me, you're never going to use the light attacks from it, and the only real reason I grabbed the pulverizer is if I think I'm going to be fighting the King Flesh Pound, because melee weapons are really good against him. If I'm fighting anybody else, it doesn't work as well. Matriarch, Patriarch, and Abomination, it really doesn't help you at all. Hans, it can, because Hans does rush you, but in all those circumstances, the Kaboom Stick would still be a better choice, because it just does more damage, and you can jump away from Hans in that instance. You can't always jump away from the King Flesh Pound, because he'll likely just keep charging you. So this one still is going to go to D tier. It's still not one of Demo's best weapons. Up next we have the Seal Squeal. Seal Squeal is probably my favorite weapon out of Demo. It is super fun. It does come in at an awkward weight of 7, and if you want to throw upgrades into it, it does go up to a weight of 9, which makes it so you can take the Kaboom Stick or the M16 with it. It can do really high damage. You do have a very high chance of blowing yourself up, though. It is probably one of your best weapons against boss, though. I would put the Seal Squeal probably also up into A tier. It's pretty solid overall. Blunderbuss does really high damage and has 2 fire modes. It can either fire out a cannonball that then can explode and deal high damage. It also has almost 100% like knockdown/stumble chance whenever you hit anything with it. So that's pretty nice. And the secondary fire is a shotgun that fires similar to the nail gun. You fire out a bunch of pellets that do very high damage and can ricochet. I really enjoy the blunderbuss, even though I don't take it a whole lot with demo. I'd probably put it towards the top end of A tier, or top end of B tier, or the low end of A tier, similar to the M16. It also does come in at somewhat of an awkward weight. Now you can take this with the Kaboom Stick and have 2 shotguns, and that's usually how I use it. But I don't use it super frequently, so I think it's B tier for me, but I could easily put it into A tier because it still is pretty good. Next is the Seeker 6. The Seeker 6 has really always had issues, at least in Killing Floor in general, and that's not because the weapon itself is bad, but just because there's no real maps designed to use it. There's only a couple maps that you can really use the Seeker 6 on effectively, and that's because its auto lock on fire can do a ton of damage and can do it at very long ranges, and it's guaranteed damage. The problem with that is that there's almost no really long maps outside of something like Nuked or even Dystopia to some extent. If you're playing custom maps, then absolutely you can, and then it's actually a really strong weapon. But on the regular maps, not so much. Sometimes in small maps, you're kind of just using this like a big revolver, essentially, because the missiles still take time to arm. So you end up using it kind of like a revolver at close range just to shoot out 6 shots that do really high damage, but you still don't get the most benefit out of it. So the Seeker 6 is probably on the low end of C tier. RPG is next. RPG is another super meta weapon with demo. It does the highest amount of consistent damage per shot out of any of their weapons. This one does have an arming distance, so you do have to wait for the RPG to travel a certain distance before it will explode. This does extremely well against crowds, extremely well against large enemies. It's a super popular weapon. It's also really good against bosses, so RPG is going to go up into S tier. Next we have the Husk Cannon. Husk Cannon can be pretty good on demo. I find that I don't really use it all that much on demo, but if you want to use it with Destroyer of Worlds, it can trigger a lot of explosions very quickly because you can spam fire this and it's just got a whole lot of shots. You can either charge this up and do really heavy hits. This works really well against Flesh Pounds and Skrakes. Or you could just spam fire it, which works really well against crowds. I would probably put the Husk Cannon somewhere into A tier. Next we have the Gravity Imploder. It's a black hole gun that you fire at an enemy or a group of enemies that then sucks all enemies in and deals damage to them. Its secondary fire works more to that, where it sucks them in even more but does very little damage, but has a very high stun chance. So you usually want to combine this with the secondary fire, then the primary fire. That way you suck everything close to one another and then you do damage to it. And overall it's a pretty decent weapon. I don't find myself taking the Gravity Imploder all that much though. I would probably also put this one to the high end of B tier or low end of A tier, much like the Blunderbuss here, just because I don't use it all that much, even though I think that it is a good weapon and there's no real reason to not use it outside of just wanting to take a different loadout. The M32 grenade launcher. This one's a lot of fun, but it's got quite a few problems. It can do a lot of damage per second, and it can work in certain maps. It's essentially you get 6 of the M79 grenade launchers. You can fire them one right after another, but it does take you about that long to reload all of them. So the reload speed is really slow. The weight on this is kind of awkward. It doesn't do more damage than the M79. I think it does the exact same damage as the unupgraded M79, so the M79 will scale higher than it per shot. It does really well against crowds. It can work against flesh pounds. It's okay against Skrakes. It's not one of the best ones. But on certain maps like Prison, you can get away with it because you can just spam this into crowds and kill a lot of stuff. Same goes with any other map that you can easily kind of spawn camp with. So the M79 has a role there, but outside of that, it's kind of mediocre at best. I would put this one at the high end of C tier next to the M79. If you guys are new here and you like this video, make sure that you get subscribed. That way you get notifications whenever I post these. Special thanks to all the supporters of the channel. If you would like to be part of this list, be sure to join the YouTube membership program or go over to my Patreon. Either way gets you early access to new videos, and it's as little as $1 a month to support the channel. Thanks everybody who does that. If you'd like to see more Killing Floor lists, go over here and click on this playlist, and I will see all of you guys next time. Till then, stay cool, and bye!